Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, back with another video for the new Boston. In this video we're going to be looking at the select distinct statement inside SQL. So we've already looked at selecting data from a database. For example, the table that I have set up here. It's a basic table. We've got a column ID, which is just an auto increment and an integer, and it's our primary key. Now the data we're going to focus on is this first name and this surname field. We've got two columns here. We've got first name, we've got a variety of first names, and we've got a variety of surnames. Now what we have in here is first of all we have duplicate data. So we've got Dale Garrett and Dale Garrett here. We've got for the second record we've got Dale Garrett, and for the fourth record we've got Dale Garrett as well. We also have some duplicate surnames. So we've got Garrett, Garrett and Garrett and Garrett here, two Malcolms and one instance of Smith. So we have some duplicate data in our database. Now you'll probably find that when you're storing things inside your database, whether it be names like I have now for any reason, say you had a comment system, I don't know, it could be absolutely any table holding any amount of data. However, what you might want to do is you might only want to select say the first name and surname, but you might want to only show the records that exist in themselves. So for example, we might just want to say, well, the surnames that we have in this database consist of Garrett, Malcolm and Smith. You might just want to say, yeah, okay, so we have three different surnames in our surnames field, and that is Garrett, Malcolm and Smith. So how do we go about doing this? Well, we use the select distinct keyword. So obviously distinct, we're selecting distinct values from our from a specific column in our database, if you like. So let's go ahead first of all and select the surname from the database, and I'll show you how adding this distinct keyword changes everything. So let's say select surname from, so we're selecting the field name here, from names, and that's about it. That's all I want to do. I want to select surname from names. So we're just selecting all surnames from this names table here. Let's go ahead and click go. Okay, so you can see that we've just literally been returned with a list of the surnames that exist in our database for every record in here. But you can see that we're still getting 4 instances of Garrett, 2 instances of Malcolm, and then just the 1 instance of Smith. So what we want to do is we want to display this as Garrett, Malcolm and Smith, because the idea of the distinct is we're not duplicating our results, but we're showing the results. We're basically saying, well, there are 4 instances of Garrett, but there is an instance of Garrett, so let's just show Garrett. So that's what we're doing with our select distinct keyword. So let's go ahead and paste in what we just did before. Now let's add the distinct after this. So the selecting distinct is a keyword in itself. So we're selecting distinct values, surname, from name. So this is the distinct value that we're selecting. I'm going to go ahead and show you in a minute what we're going to do if we're selecting the surname and the first name from names if we're using distinct. Let's go ahead and click go here. I'll just copy and paste this into my clipboard, or copy this into my clipboard so we can use it in a moment. Now you can see that what it's done is it's selected the surnames that actually exist, but it hasn't shown the duplicate records that exist for this surname in this example. So just by adding this select distinct statement, we have distinctly selected values from our database. So it all adds up to the fact that it's called select distinct. Okay, so now remember we had duplicate data for Dale Garrett, the record Dale Garrett here. We've got Dale Garrett and we've got Dale Garrett here. So what happens if we come into our SQL tab and we don't just select distinct surname, but we select distinct first name as well. So select distinct surname, first name from names. Let's click go and see what happens. Okay, so you can see that we've been we're displaying all of the data that exists into the database, but there's obviously one change in here. And you'll see that what we've actually done is we've gotten rid of the duplicate name inside of our database. So what we can do is we can select distinct values by specifying two fields, so that two fields are selected distinctly. So we've got the surname and first name are being selected distinctly. Now Alex and Garrett are different data, Dale and Garrett are different data. However, if we have Dale Garrett duplicate, that's not going to be displayed because we're selecting distinct from the first name and the surname joined. So that's the select distinct statement inside SQL. Now let's talk about the kind of uses you might have for it. Okay, so let's say you had a table which stored users' comments inside. Let's say you had a guestbook application that stored the name of the user or the email address of the user who was posting the comment and the comment itself. Now what you might want to do is you might want to say, produce a list of all the email addresses that have ever written any comment. You might not want to produce a list of every single email address because you're not going to be able to see how many users have been posting. So if we had, say, a list of 100 email addresses, but 60 of them were unique, so we had 60 of the same email address in there, but you know, half of them or just over half of them might have posted twice or 3 times if it was a less of a percentage. So you might want to select distinct to see how many actual people have made a post in somewhere, or you know, I'm sure you can make up your own uses for it. There's lots of different uses you can get out of that, this select distinct. But next time you want to select distinct values from your database, just use the select distinct key statement, and you're going to be returning distinct values from fields that are specified. Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is a video tutorial for the new Boston. Now, in this series of tutorials, we're going to be creating a user login and registration system, or rather a user registration and login system. We're going to create the login process first, then create the register system, or the registration system. The reason you should do it this way is because you want to make sure your login is processed correctly before you start to register your users. It just works out generally a lot better this way. And obviously, just a few notes before we begin. I'm going to be creating the login and register system with just 2 fields, and that is the username and the password. In fact, no, we'll include the first name and the last name as well. The reason I'm not going to include things like email address, address, or whatever else you're planning to store for your users is because if we spend a lot of time creating extra fields in the tutorial, we're going to be wasting valuable learning time. Whereas once you've completed the tutorial and you understand how fields are created and how we can register users, then you can obviously go ahead and input your own unique form fields. So the first thing we need to do, we're not going to be writing any code in this tutorial. We're going to be coming over to PHP MyAdmin, and we're going to be setting up our table in which we're going to store user data. And then what we're going to do is pop a few sort of piece of dummy data in there, if you like. So we're going to register a couple of users manually using PHP MyAdmin. So the first thing I've done is I've already created my database in PHP MyAdmin. You should know how to do this. So I've created my database, now I need to create a table. I'm going to call this table just simply users. Now we need to determine how many fields we need to store. So the first field I'm going to store is, let's just blank this so we can write some notes. The first field I'm going to store is the ID. This is obviously going to be the unique field. This is going to be the primary key, and it's going to be auto increment as well. We also need to store obviously the username, the password, let's just pop that over there, the first name, and we'll say surname. So these are the 4 fields or 5 fields that we need to include in our program. We can also include things like register date, registration date, but we're not going to do that for now. Like I said, the purpose of the tutorial is to show you how to include everything and put everything together. So let's go ahead and create these fields. Let's delete that first of all. Remember it was 5 fields, so we type 5 in there and click go. Okay, so now to set up each field, so ID is obviously going to be an integer because it's going to be an auto incrementing value. So let's go ahead, that's int by default. We can go ahead and we're going to set the index to primary because this is our unique field in our table, and also AI, which stands for auto increment. So for every value that's created, for every row that's created, this will increment by 1, giving each user a unique number starting from 1. Okay, so the next one is username, then we have password, then we have first name, and also we have surname. So for the username and password, we're going to pick a varchar data type, the same with the first name and the last name, so we can do these while we're selecting the others. Okay, so the username and password, I'm going to give a limit of both 30 characters. The first name and the surname, I'm going to say 40. Now obviously you can change these limits yourself. You can change them to whatever you want. I'm just doing this for sort of ease of use and teaching, but I'd say that a username or password shouldn't be more than 30 characters, and a first name and surname shouldn't be more than 40 characters, just in case we have an extra long name. So we don't need to set any other properties for these. We can go ahead and click save down here, and we'll just examine our structure of our table just to make sure everything's correct. So we've got ID, it's underlined, so we know it's a primary key. We've got auto increment on this under the extra, and int is 11 characters, that's absolutely fine. This could be a small or medium int, but we'll keep it at this just in case we need to register lots and lots and lots of users. Username and password are both variable characters, and their length of 30, and first name and surname are also variable characters and their length of 40. Okay, so we've set up our table. Let's go ahead and put some data inside of here. Now there's one thing to bear in mind. We're going to be storing our password as an MD5 hash. That reminds me, actually, let's go back to our structure and let's change the password field here. So let's check that and then click the edit button. Let's change this to 32. Now the reason we're changing this to 32 is we're storing the password as an MD5 hash. Therefore an MD5 hash will always, or more or less always, most of the time, equal, it will be the length of 32. So whatever sort of length our password is, our MD5 hash will typically be 32 characters. So we're storing a 32 character password in here because that will be the MD5 hash. And if you don't know what an MD5 hash is, or you don't know how to create one with PHP, take a look at my other tutorial on MD5 hashes, and that will sort of walk you through how we relate that to passwords. Okay, so let's go ahead and insert some data. Now there's a couple of things we need to do. With the password, we can't just enter a normal password in here. We need to input an MD5 hash, and you'll see later on when we register our users, we're going to convert the password that they've entered in a text field to an MD5 hash before we insert it into the database. But for now I'm going to create a PHP script to quickly convert a password that I want to manually put into here. So my username is going to be Alex. We'll leave the password blank for now. I'm going to put my first and surname in, and the password is going to be equal to the value password. So my password is going to be password. In fact, we'll do pass123. That's a lot better, so we don't get confused between field name and the actual password. So I'm going to echo out MD5, and in here I'm going to put pass123, and this is going to return the MD5 hash. Okay, so I can just copy that and paste that into my database. So obviously you won't have to do this when you're registering your users. And I'm going to click go. Okay, so there. Let's click browse to make sure all the data's in there. Okay, so we've got ID of 1. That's automatically updated that for us. So that's an ID of 1. Username is Alex. Password is this hash, which is equivalent to pass123, or the hash of pass123. First name Alex and surname Garrett. Okay, so now that we've registered or manually registered a user, we are pretty much done setting up our database, setting up our table rather, and inserting this value. So in the next part, what we're going to be doing is logging this user on. Hi, this is Alex from PHP Academy, back with another video for the New Boston. Now, in the last part of the tutorial, we created our table, which is inside our database called a database. We created a table called users, then we inserted some manual data in, just so we can test our login process. So we're going to write a process to log this user in. We inserted this data here, the username with Alex, the password was this MD5 hash, which we'll deal with later, and we've got first name and surname. So we've got our hash for security reasons. When we're logging in, let's just get rid of this that we used earlier. When we're logging in, we need to convert the password that the user specifies and see if that matches the same hash, because as you know, MD5 is a one-way algorithm and the result will always be the same. Okay, so we need to think about how we're going to set up our files. Now, I'm going to have an index.php which is going to check if the user's logged in and display specific content if they are logged in or if they're not logged in. So we're going to have something similar to the following. We're going to say if logged in, display something, otherwise display something else. We could even use an if else if statement, or if else if, sorry, and we could say not logged in. And we're going to create this function which is going to check to see if session data exists, or if a session has been set, and if the session isn't empty. So we'll get rid of that for now, but that's just a general idea. We're going to sort of say, in here we're going to say something like welcome, and maybe specify the user's name here. And then for this we're going to say please log in, okay, and perhaps display our login form. So we'll leave index.php for now. We're going to create a new file which is going to connect to our database. So let's say connect.inc.php. We'll call that connect.inc.php. So the first thing we want to do is we want to specify the host name, the username and the password. So MySQL host, in my case that's equal to localhost, and in most cases that is. If you're running on a local server, if you're trying to connect to a remote database, you'll need to specify the host name, but for now it's localhost. For me, the MySQL user is called root. These are the default settings, and because I'm using default settings, my password is equal to nothing. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to specify what table we're going to connect to, and that is, or the database, sorry, MySQL database. The database is called a_database, and this is found, let's just pop into phpMyAdmin here, so a_database. Okay, so now we can connect, so I'm going to say if MySQL connect, and then we can pop our variables in here. So the first variable is MySQL host, that's the first argument we pass through to this MySQL connect function, and then we say MySQL user, and then we say MySQL password. So if this function connects successfully, anything inside this block here will be executed. So we can then say let's say if MySQL connect, and then we can say we could say and MySQL select database, and the database we've obviously predefined in this variable MySQL DB. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this around, and I'm going to say if this is unsuccessful or this is unsuccessful, then we want to kill the page and we want to specify the MySQL error. And that's with brackets there. So this we're echoing out the contents of this function, or the value returned from this function, which is the error last received from MySQL. So if either of these don't connect, so if we don't connect to the database itself, the server itself, or we don't select the database correctly, then we kill with an error. Otherwise we just carry on with our code normally. So we're going to declare or require this file at the top of everywhere where we need to connect. And the reason we do this is if we had, say, 5-10 files here, instead of writing this code 5 or 10 times, we just include this file here.
So let's go ahead and test this connect.inc.php by including it inside index.php. But I'm going to require it so we kill the page if this file cannot be found. So connect.inc.php. Let's come on to our browser and refresh the page. Okay, you can see that nothing's come up, so hopefully we haven't returned an error. But now let's force an error. So I'm going to put local host instead of local host. Let's refresh, and you can see that unknown MySQL server host localhost. So we've retrieved an error. So okay, let's change that back, and we'll change the database name to a database 1. And let's refresh. And you can see we've returned an error saying this is an unknown database. So we know that either way, if we don't connect to the server correctly or we don't select our database correctly, we always echo a MySQL error out. Now, upon completion of development, you may want to change this to a error message in here as a string. This just means that then it's a bit more user-friendly for your users rather than outputting the content or the return value of MySQL error function. So for now, connect.inc.php is complete. So now what we want to do is we want to create a page where the user can log in. So I'm going to create this as an include file. So what I can do is then in this if statement that I create inside index.php, I want to show that form, if you like, to the user. So let's go ahead and open up a new file. We'll start some PHP tags, and I'm going to call this login form.inc.php. So let's go ahead and start creating the form itself. Let's go down and start to create our form. So this form is called, oh, and just by the way, these includes depend on how your website works. So when we're using, let's say form action equals something there, which to end our form. When we say form action, I'm going to specify the page that this is currently included in. So eventually this action is going to equal index.php, but I'm actually going to be using one of the predefined server variables to determine which page this is included in. If that doesn't make sense now, it will do later. But for now, our method's going to be post. Okay, so our action, what's going to happen here? We need to specify a variable up here that's going to tell us what our page is logged in, what page we are currently on. In fact, I might create a new file called, we'll call this core.inc.php, and we'll include some just variables, some predefined variables in here. The first thing I'm going to write is current underscore file, and that's going to equal $_server, and remember this is acts as an associative array. And the value we're going to give this, or the key we're looking for here, is script file name. So let's just let's include that in index, or include that in yeah, we'll include that in index.php. So require, let's go back, core.inc.php, and now here we can just echo that just to test it's working. So that is current underscore file. And let's go back and refresh our page. Okay, so current file is index.php. Let's go back to core.inc. I think what we could use is script file, perhaps? No. I think we can do script name. Oh. Script name, refresh there, see what we get. Okay, yeah, this is fine. So now what we've got is the location we want to submit a form to, because at the moment we're on index.php. However, if I was to say, just as an example, that we're not going to end up doing this, but in login form, if I was to require core.inc.php, and then I was to echo the current file, let's see how this changes. So at the moment we're on index.php, and that's showing us index.php. But because this is dynamic, it's going to update when we change the page. Okay, maybe not. Let's. Oh wait, sorry. Yeah, we need to go to login form.inc.php, and then that gives us this value. So if the login form is included in index.php, then whatever we write in here is whatever we write for the form action is going to be displayed. So let me just give you an example of that first of all. Let's open up PHP tags, and I'm going to echo current file. Now you might be thinking, well, we haven't required the core.inc.php file in here, so how on earth can we use this variable? Well, the answer is we've required it in index.php, and we've also required, sorry, not connect, we've required core here, but what we're going to do is we're going to include login form.inc.php. I'm going to include login form.inc.php, so then it will read it still from here. So think of this as a long page with these included. Now, getting your head around this structuring system may be difficult, but it just means that everything's kept neat and tidy and you can reuse things, etc, etc. So let's refresh and see what happens. Let's go back to index.php. Okay, so what we've got up at the moment, if we view the page source, you can see form action equals, and we're going back to index.php, even though this code exists. So even though we're inside login form.inc.php and we're echoing the current file, because this is included within index.php, what we're doing is we're still taking this file name, so we're submitting the data back to index.php, which is still going to be processed in login form.inc.php. So it's quite hard to understand, but eventually as we go along you'll get it if you haven't already. So we've done that. Now what we need to do is specify our username and password login fields. So let's say username, and we create a form field here, basic HTML, so type text, and the name of this is going to be username, and then we want the password, which is another input type. This time it's password, and the name is password. So the type of this is password, just so it's sort of starred out by our browser. And then let's create a submit button. So type equals submit, and the value of this, I'm going to say login. So let's go back and refresh our index page. Okay, so you can see that we've got this login form now. Okay, so the next thing to do is process what's going to happen when this login form is clicked. So we can view an example of what's going to happen on the index.php page, even though we're processing it inside login form because we've included it. So let's first of all check if the username and password have been set, meaning the form has been submitted. So you may have seen this example a few times before. So we're saying if is set, and we're wrapping that in brackets, and we're specifying this post data here that's coming through, and we're saying and is set $_post, and the password as well needs to be set, and then inside the block we're checking if it's empty or not. So we're first of all saying is it set, and if it is, we're executing this block or running this block, and now we're saying if not empty, in fact no, we can redefine the variables here, or reinitiate them into another variable. So username equals $_post username, and password equals $_post password. Okay, so now we can say if not empty username and not empty password, do something, otherwise do something else. So the something else will be you must supply a username and password. and the if it is entered is, we'll just put for now OK. So let's see how this works. So we'll click index.php, refresh that page, click login, and it says you must supply username and password. Now what we can do is type something in, click login, and it says OK. So we're on index.php, but we're processing what's going on inside loginform.inc. So we're keeping the index file as clean as possible. And eventually we're going to put this into an if statement, into a block, which means if the user is logged in, we don't want to show this login form. Otherwise, we want to show the login form. So we need to continue in login form to actually log the user in. So how are we going to do this? First of all, we need a query, and this is going to be equal to select, and we need to select the username and password from, and let's go reference back to our table to see, from users. So we're selecting from users, where, and then we're going to say username is equal to username, and password is equal to password. So we've constructed here a query where we're selecting the username and password. In fact, we don't even need to do that. Let's just select the ID. So we're selecting the ID from our users table, where the username is equal to Alex in this case, and the password is equal to password in this case. Now we've got one problem already. Password is plain text, and the password stored in the database is MD5 data. So what we need to do here is we need to say MD5 wrapping around the password, which will then automatically convert this to an MD5 value. In fact, no, that's not going to work. I'll tell you why. If the user entered nothing, we're still generating an MD5 hash, so we can get away with not entering a password. So instead of doing that, let's create a new variable, which is probably better, called password hash, and that's going to equal to MD5 of password. So we've created a new variable. Now we can pop this into our query like that. So let's first of all execute this query. So query run equals mysql query, and let's pop this into an if statement just to check that it works. So if that, then run this block, otherwise something. Now we've actually now predetermined, so if this query is fine and it works, then we can, in fact no, we don't need this else here. If this query works, then we can do something with it. And what we need to do with it is we need to check how many rows have been returned. Now, if 0 rows have been returned, we have, if 0 rows have been returned, a username and a password don't match. So a username and a password combination haven't matched, which means they may have entered the correct username, they may have not entered the correct password, or vice versa, they may have entered the correct password but not the right username. So we need to create a check in here. First of all, we'll say query num, and that's, or num rows would be better, and that's equal to mysql num rows of our query that we've run. And now we need to perform a check to say if query num rows is equal to 0, no such user exists, otherwise do something else. So here we're going to say echo invalid username password combination. Okay, so we've executed our query. As long as the query is structured properly and it makes sense, we're going to continue with this code here. Then we're creating a value of the number of rows returned. Then we're checking if that equals to 0. If it does equal to 0, it means that the username and password combination don't match, so we echo out a warning to the user and we don't log them in. Otherwise, we need to say OK for now, the user's logged in successfully. So let's use this as an example. So let's go back to our users table. We've got Alex and the password, which I think is pass123, but the MD5 hash. Remember, we convert the MD5 hash automatically when we process the login. And then we have various bits of information which aren't important just now. So let's try a user login that's incorrect. So I'm going to type Billy and pass123. Now bear in mind that pass123 exists in the database, but it doesn't exist next to Billy. So let's click login. We've got invalid username password combination. So our SQL query was structured correctly, but it returned no rows. Now otherwise we want to say if query num rows equals 1, then we can echo OK, because we're never going to echo 2 rows because the username is not going to exist twice. We're not going to have users on our website with the same username. So now let's try this with Alex and pass one. I think I typed pass, yeah, pass123, and click login, and it says OK. So now let's return some of the data that we've been processing, so we can make sure that we know. Well, we already know it matches, but let's echo out username, and we'll echo out. We'll just echo out the password hash, so you can see how this is working. So once we've logged in correctly, username and pass123, you'll see that this is the hash, the password hash of what we've entered, which starts with 322 and ends with A24. So 322 A24. So we know that it's converted the hash properly. We know that anyway. So now that the user's logged in OK and we've displayed this OK message, we don't actually want to do this. This was just for our purpose. What we now want to do is we want to set a session with the user's ID. So we've selected the ID from the database, but now we need to get this data. So I'm going to say user underscore ID, and this is going to equal to MySQL result. Remember this function from when we learned specifics on using databases. MySQL result, we're taking the result from the query that we run earlier. We're going for row 0, and we're looking in the ID column. Let's just echo out user ID so we know this works properly. Let's test now with adding another user so we can see if this ID is returned correctly for each user we log in. So let's insert some data. So we'll say Billy. Password we'll just use as the same thing. So pass123. First name Billy, last name Garrett. Let's click go and insert that data. Now you can see that everything's done, everything's worked. We've got ID of 1 for Alex and 2 for Billy. So let's try logging each user in, and we should return this user ID. So Alex, pass123, click login, and it's returned a value of 1. Now let's try Billy, pass123, click login, and it's returned a value of 2. So now we're logging the user in, and we're also returning the user ID. Now why do we need this user ID? The reason we need it is because we need to store it in a session, in some session data, so we can then tell that the user has logged in. And we can also use this ID to get any information we need from this table. For example, we can select the first name or the surname or both from, say, if we've stored 1 inside a session. That would mean that Alex is logged in, then we can get any data we need. So these are the fundamentals of a user login system, storing something that allows us to access data about our user, which can change. So one day I could log in as Alex, and one day I could log in as Billy, or another user could log in as Billy. Okay, so let's put this into a session. Now before we do that, we need to define something in our core.inc.php. Remember, this is included at the very top of our index page. Core.inc.php, we need to say session underscore start. Remember, we need to do that for all sessions to be able to use them on pages. So as long as we include this core.inc.php on every file, which we will be doing at the very top, then we're going to be able to log users in. We also want OB start before that, because what we're going to be doing is using headers, the header function, to redirect our user back to the index page when they've logged in correctly. So we need OB start, session start, and now in here what we can do is we can say $_session user underscore ID equals user underscore ID. So we've grabbed the user ID from the user that has correctly entered their username and password. Now we're storing it inside a session called called user ID. Okay. Now what we want to do is say header location, and we want to go back to the index.php page. We're already on that, but this will just refresh it. It will perform the checks to say, is this user logged in, and it will give us some data out. So okay, so we're pretty much done there. Let's just go back to our index.php page, and we will create an if statement. Now let's assume create an if statement else, and then down here let's assume, we'll ignore this for now, let's assume that a session called user ID has been set and it isn't empty. Now this means that the user has logged in, because it means that we've gone through the process of setting this to the user ID of the correct user that's logged in, or the user that's correctly entered their details. So all we need to do is say if is set $_session user underscore ID and not empty $_session user ID. So for any reason that a session called user ID has been set and it's not empty, then we still run this code. Well, we say, is it not empty, because we need it to contain a value. In that case, we can say echo you're logged in. Let's just escape that single quotation mark. Otherwise, we want to present the user with the login form. So let's just go through before I test this whole login process, because we've pretty much logged a user in now. So let me just test this, or go through this in my head, or not in my head, but with you guys. So we'll start from this bit here. We grab the user ID from the result of where we've already echoed this out, so you know what it does. We've got 1 for Alex and 2 for Billy. We set the session here, so this session will now equal 1 if I log in as Alex. Then we relocate to index.php. So we're already on index.php because we've included this. We can even refresh now just to show you that we're still logged in. So we're still not logged in. Now as soon as I type in Alex here, and I type in pass123 here, and I click login, we're going to process everything that we've already talked about. Then we're going to locate back to index.php, so we're going to refresh the page essentially. Then this check is going to happen again, but this time we have set session with the user ID key, and it's not empty, so we're going to say you're logged in. So let's test that. Click in login, and now it says you're logged in. No matter how many times we refresh this page, the session is still set, therefore we're still logged in. So now you've essentially learned how to log a user in. And that's basically it for logging a user in. What you can now do is, on any other page that you work with, say you had a page called I don't know, tutorials.php, and you needed the user to be logged in, you could use this line. What you could do to make things easier and quicker is get rid of this inside here and create a function that allows you to quickly check if the user's logged in. So let's go back to core.inc.php, and we're going to create a function called logged in. And what we're going to do inside this function is we're going to say if, we're going to do exactly the same as what we've done, what we've just removed from index.php here, but we're going to put it in a function. So all we need to do is call this. So if is set, everything's set and it's not empty, return true. And otherwise up here we can say return, oh no, probably not a good way to do it. And we could say here, else return false. So if we are logged in, we're going to return true, otherwise we're going to return false. So if you know about functions, and if you've correctly learned about functions, you'll know I can just put if logged in, then it will say we're logged in, because this will return true, so this block will run. If we return false, we're going to include the login form. So let's go back to the page and see if that works. Yep, it still tells us that we are logged in. Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is a PHP video tutorial for the new Boston. Now, in this user login and registration system, we've already determined how to log a user in. So what we've done is we've created the index.php page with our if statement, and we've used our login function, which is located in core. We've also created our login form, and we've been able to process this inside this, and that's used as an include. So we're keeping our index.php page as clean as possible. Now let's go over to our browser and see that we're logged in at the moment, and there's no way we can actually get out of this at the moment. What we need to do is create a page that's going to kill all our session variables that we've used. You can kill specific ones, but probably better to just use session destroy, which we have already covered in previous tutorials. So if you're not comfortable with this, then go back and have a look at that. So I'm going to create a new page, and this is going to be called logout.php. Okay, so we're going to include a link in our login form, in index.php. We're going to say you're logged in, and then we're going to give the user the option to log out. So we're going to create a link, and it's going to say logout, and this is to logout.php. So let's just go to our browser and refresh. You can see we've got our logout button link come up. If we click that, we go to logout.php. Now we need to create some code inside logout.php to actually log our user out. And the first thing I'm going to do is think about if the user logs out on a specific page. Remember, we're including these, so we could actually, for example, we could show our login form in a header file in our page. We could have a template system with a header, which never changes. So we could be on one of many pages when we click log out. So in core, I want a variable called referrer, call it HTTP referrer, and this is using again the predefined server environmental variables, and it's just HTTP underscore referrer. And what this is going to do is this is going to tell us the page that we've come from. So let's try this first of all in logout. So therefore we need to require core.inc.php. Now there's a reason we need to require this anyway. Remember, in core.inc.php we've got session start. To log out, to kill a session or destroy a session, we need to start the session use beforehand. So require core.inc.php, and we're going to echo out this HTTP referrer variable to see if it works. So HTTP referrer. Okay, so we're coming from index.php when we click this button. So hopefully when we land on logout.php, it's going to tell us where we came from. So if we click logout, we've now got the full URL of where we came from, which is localhost/series/user/system/index.php. So after we've processed the logout, we can refer ourselves back to this page using that, and a combination of that and the header function. So let's go ahead and program in everything in logout.php. The first thing we need to do, or we've already done, is include this file, require this file, and we've started our session in here. So now all we need to do is say session underscore destroy. So this is going to kill all sessions that we've already created. We've only got one session, and that goes by the name of user ID, and we've set this here. So we'll just use the session destroy. Let's go to logout.php. Use session destroy. That will just make sure everything we've already set in the session is destroyed. So now what we need to do is we need to refer the user back to the page that they came from. So we're going to be using the header function here, And just to point out at this point, we're already processing data hit. We're giving output before this point, so that's why we've used ob start. There's a tutorial on that as well if you haven't already understood why we've put that in. So we need header, and we're going to say location colon space, and then we're going to append on the HTTP referrer that we echoed out earlier to demonstrate. So HTTP referrer, and we're good to go now. So if we come into our index.php page, remember our index.php page, if we're not logged in, so presumably when we click the log output.php, sessions are going to be destroyed. We're going to be referred back to this page. We're not going to be logged in, so now we're going to include the login form and display the login form to the user. So let's have a look at that. Let's click log out and see what happens. Okay, so we've been referred back to index.php very quickly. See how quickly it processes, ready for us to log in again if we want to. So let me just try it again. Click log in. You're logged in, so we can click log out again, and it refers us back here. So now we've successfully created our log out button. We can log ourselves out while we're testing this, and we can eventually log a user out if they were to use this system. Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is a video tutorial for the new Boston. Now, we've already established how to log a user in depending on database values such as Alex or Billy both here. Now, when we do log in, let's go ahead and log me in. You'll see that we have you're logged in, log out, that's absolutely fine. Now, the one thing that we're missing to round off our website once a user's logged in is we're not displaying specific information about the user that is logged in. You already know that the user's ID, which is unique to each user, is stored in a session here. So at the moment, this value here, this session, will be equal to 1 because I've logged in as Alex, so the ID has been set to 1. Now, inside core.inc.php, which remember we set up to be included in every file, we want to create a function to be able to grab any field from our database here, depending on the ID. So this is going to shorten the amount of code we do inside our actual our files ourselves. So inside this core.inc.php, we're going to create a function which we can use however many times we want, and also it will save a lot of resources as well, so it won't slow down your server as much and won't perform as many queries. So where do we start? We need to outline the skeleton of our function. So I'm going to call this getField. Okay. So what arguments is this function going to take? So getField, the first important bit of information we need is the ID, the user's ID. The second we need is the field name. So I'm just going to call this field. Okay, so we need the user ID, the supplied user ID, and we need the field. In fact, looking at this, we don't actually need the user ID because it's already stored, isn't it? Okay, so we don't need the user ID. We just need the field name. This is going to grab the corresponding data from the field specified from this user's table. So the first thing we need to do is create a variable up here which is going to hold the value. In fact, no, we don't need to do that. I'm just making it longer for myself. So I'm going to write global $_session user ID. Now the reason I've done this is I have a tutorial on why you need to do this. In fact, no, I don't think we even need to do that, do we? Okay, so let's echo this out and we'll see if this works. So echo out basically the user's ID. So we'll come to index.php. You're logged in, so let's create a line break there, and down here we'll let's run the function getField. Okay, so let's go back to our page and we'll see what we come up with. Okay, yeah, so we echo 1. Now, this getField, we're aiming by the end of this tutorial to display the user's name. okay, from after this logged in. So we're going to say you're logged in, Alex Garrett. But obviously not everyone is called Alex Garrett, so we need to use this get field function to make this work well. So the first thing we need to do is we need to perform a query. So the query equals select. Now we need to specify the field. So that's field, and that's encased in apostrophes, from users where, and this is the important part, ID equals, so let's just apostrophes by all these, where ID is equal to $_session, and that is user ID. Let's just concatenate this on so it looks a bit tidier. Okay, so select the field that we specify in here from users where the ID is equal to something. Okay, so this is get user field, we can call this, because it's only selecting from the table users. So get user field, and we specify a field in here. Then what we need to do is we need to execute the query. So query run is equal to MySQL query, and we need to encase this in an if statement to ensure that we only execute this block here if this query is successful. So if we're basically saying in plain English, if this query is successful, then what we need to do is we need to grab this data. So we're going to return, and what we're going to return is MySQL result, and the result is from the query run, the row 0, because remember we're only returning one row, because there's only ever going to be one ID, and the field we can pop again in here. So field, let's just get rid of them single quotation marks. So field. Hi, this is Alex from phpacademy.org, and this is a video tutorial for the new Boston. Now, we've already established how to log a user in depending on database values such as Alex or Billy both here. Now, when we do log in, let's go ahead and log me in. You'll see that we have you're logged in, log out, that's absolutely fine. Now, the one thing that we're missing to round off our website once a user's logged in is we're not displaying specific information about the user that is logged in. You already know that the user's ID, which is unique to each user, is stored in a session here. So at the moment, this value here, this session, will be equal to 1 because I've logged in as Alex, so the ID has been set to 1. Now, inside core.inc.php, which remember we set up to be included in every file, we want to create a function to be able to grab any field from our database here, depending on the ID. So this is going to shorten the amount of code we do inside our actual files ourselves. So inside this core.inc.php, we're going to create a function which we can use however many times we want, and also it will save a lot of resources as well, so it won't slow down your server as much and won't perform as many queries. So where do we start? We need to outline the skeleton of our function. So I'm going to call this get field. Okay, so what arguments is this function going to take? So get field, the first important bit of information we need is the ID, the user's ID. The second we need is the field name, so I'm just going to call this field. Okay, so we need the user ID, the supplied user ID, and we need the field. In fact, looking at this, we don't actually need the user ID because it's already stored, isn't it? Okay, so we don't need the user ID, we just need the field name. This is going to grab the corresponding data from the field specified from this user's table. So the first thing we need to do is create a variable up here which is going to hold the value. In fact, no, we don't need to do that. I'm just making it longer for myself. So I'm going to write global $_session user ID. Now the reason I've done this is I have a tutorial on why you need to do this. In fact, no, I don't think we even need to do that, do we? Okay, so let's echo this out and we'll see if this works. So echo out basically the user's ID. So we'll come to index.php. You're logged in, so let's create a line break there, and down here we'll let's run the function get field. Okay, so let's go back to our page and we'll see what we come up with. Okay, yeah, so we echo 1. Now this get field, we're aiming by the end of this tutorial to display the user's name, okay, from after this logged in. So we're going to say you're logged in Alex Garrett, but obviously not everyone is called Alex Garrett, so we need to use this get field function to make this work well. So the first thing we need to do is we need to perform a query. So the query equals select. Now we need to specify the field, so that's field, and that's encased in apostrophes, from users where, and this is the important part, ID equals, so let's just apostrophes by all these, where ID is equal to $_session, and that is user ID. Let's just concatenate this on so it looks a bit tidier. Okay, so select the field that we specify in here from users where the ID is equal to something. Okay, so this is get user field, we can call this, because it's only selecting from the table users. So get user field, and we specify a field in here. Then what we need to do is we need to execute the query. So query run is equal to MySQL query, and we need to encase this in an if statement to ensure that we only execute this block here if this query is successful. So if we're basically saying in plain English, if this query is successful, then what we need to do is we need to grab this data. So we're going to return, and what we're going to return is MySQL result, and the result is from the query run, the row 0, because remember we're only returning one row, because there's only ever going to be one ID, and the field we can pop again in here, so field. Let's just get rid of them single quotation marks, so field.